Before heading home, I made a quick call to my lawyer. He congratulated me on successfully dodging Marcia's desperate last-minute attempts to halt the divorce, and then, with a smirk audible in his voice, asked for $10,000 to cover additional expenses. For a moment, I was speechless, my mind racing with irritation until I heard him break into laughter. It was a terrible joke, one that did little to ease the tension in my chest, but I had to admit it lightened the mood, if only slightly. He suggested we settle up over a steak dinner instead, and I agreed. Still, I made a mental note to let him know later how much I hated his jokes. As I hung up, my mind drifted back to the unresolved mystery that had been gnawing at me for months. Why had the police dropped the investigation into Howard Paddington's murder so quickly? They had questioned me briefly, but never followed up. It didn't sit right. Maybe it was better to let sleeping dogs lie, but part of me couldn't help wondering what had really happened. Later, my daughter Jenny called to congratulate me on the divorce, though her tone was subdued. Children often don't know how to react when their parents split, and I could tell she was still processing it. She mentioned that Marcia had fallen into a deep depression and that her sister, was staying with her for support. I wasn't surprised. Marcia was starting to face the financial fallout of her decisions, and she was in for a rough time. That thought brought a small, involuntary smile to my face as I ended the call. For the next 2 years, Marcia and I stayed out of each other's lives completely. I didn't check in on her, and she didn't reach out to me. The only link we had was through Jenny, but we both knew better than to discuss Marcia during our monthly phone calls. From what little I learned, Marcia had lost the house to the bank and was working in a clothing store at the local mall. Howard's death had left her with nothing, and to make matters worse, his life insurance policies both named his mother as the sole beneficiary. Unsurprisingly, Mother Paddington wasn't inclined to share a cent with Marcia. As for me, I moved on, or at least tried to. I went on a few dinner dates, but nothing serious. I wasn't ready to dive back into the world of romance. Later that year, Jenny announced that she was getting married. Her fiancé was a good guy, and I was genuinely happy for her. The wedding was set for Harrisburg, his hometown, and I would be covering most of the costs. That was fine with me, anything for Jenny's happiness. There was, however, one non-negotiable condition. I didn't want to be seated anywhere near Marcia at the wedding, nor did I want to interact with her in any way. Jenny was reluctant, but she agreed. I knew that if I had to see or speak to Marcia, there was a good chance the day could be ruined by a scene. Better to avoid that possibility altogether. The wedding day arrived, and as expected, it was a picture-perfect event. Aren't all weddings? Jenny kept her promise. Marcia and I were positioned at opposite ends of the head table, far enough apart that we could avoid each other without drawing attention. Marcia arrived with a well-dressed man about 50 years old. I didn't recognize him, nor did I care who he was. He could have been a coworker, a friend, or even her new lover. It didn't matter to me. When the time came for the father of the bride toast, I stood up, feeling a devilish thrill of anticipation. I had planned a little prank, something subtle but personal, something only Marcia would notice. Holding my champagne glass in my left hand, even though I was right-handed, I lifted it high in a toast. As my arm rose, the sleeve of my tuxedo slipped back just enough to reveal the wristwatch beneath a striking tag heuer with a sleek black alligator band. I held my arm aloft for a second longer than necessary, making sure the watch caught the light just so. From across the room, I saw Marcia's face go pale as her eyes zeroed in on the timepiece. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The realization hit her like a freight train. My little prank had worked. I continued my toast, though I barely registered the words coming out of my mouth. All I cared about was the shock on Marcia's face. As I sat back down, a smug grin spread across my lips. Mission accomplished. Moments later, I saw Marcia and her escort stand up and quietly leave the reception. She looked upset, though whether she was crying, I couldn't say. I stayed for another hour, playing the role of the dutiful father, before slipping away to my hotel room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, wondering what Marcia would do next. Would she confront me? Would she let it go? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. At 6 a.m., there was a knock on my door. Two men in dark suits stood in the hallway. For a split second, I imagined Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black and stifled a laugh. I opened the door. "Mr. John Terrell?" the taller one asked. "That's me," I replied, my voice calm but curious. "What can I do for you?" They introduced themselves as investigators from the state attorney's office. I waved them inside and motioned for them to sit. I took my time finishing getting dressed, deliberately dragging out the process. I knew why they were here. "What brings you to my door this early?" I asked as I sat down. "You were at the Peterson-Terrell wedding yesterday, correct?" the taller agent asked. "Of course. Jenny is my daughter," I replied, my tone even. "We received a call that you were wearing a very expensive Tag Heuer watch at the reception," he continued. I couldn't help but smile. I leaned over, picked up the watch from the nightstand, and held it up for them to see. "This one?" I asked. "That's the one," he confirmed, though his patience was clearly wearing thin. "Where did you get it?" "Why?" I asked, playing dumb. "Could you please just answer the question, Mr. Terrell?" The shorter agent chimed in. "I bought it on eBay," I said nonchalantly. "Now, why don't you tell me why you're so interested?" They exchanged uneasy glances before the taller one spoke again. "A watch identical to that one was stolen off the body of Howard Paddington after he was murdered 3 years ago." I didn't flinch. "I'm sure a lot of watches look like this one," I replied smoothly. "You're going to need to be more specific." The tension was palpable. They were losing control of the conversation. "Mr. Terrell, do you know Howard Paddington?" the shorter agent asked. "Yes," I said flatly. "He had an affair with my wife, which is why we're divorced." The taller agent leaned forward. "Mr. Paddington owned a watch exactly like the one you're holding when he was killed. And how do you know that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The silence that followed was deafening. "Did he have the watch on him when he was found?" I pressed. They both shook their heads. "So you're telling me that my ex-wife called you and said this was Howard's watch?" I asked, irritated. The taller agent nodded. "Yes. Your ex-wife claimed she bought the watch for him." "Well, maybe you should be talking to her," I said, my frustration barely concealed. "I bought this watch for $49 on eBay. Want to see the receipt?" They looked at me in disbelief as I pulled a folded piece of paper from my wallet and handed it over. The taller agent unfolded it and read the printout. "This says you bought a Tig Heuer," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. "That's right. Look closer at the watch," I said, holding it out. The shorter agent examined the face carefully. "It says Tig Heuer, not Tag Heuer," I smirked. "So, did my ex-wife buy a Tag Heuer for Howard? Or a Tig Heuer?" Their frustration was evident. They had come expecting to confront me with evidence, but instead, they were walking into a brick wall. "Can we see the back of the watch?" the taller agent asked, clearly grasping at straws. "Be my guest," I said, handing it over. They turned it over and stared at the engraving. "Eat shit and die." They returned the watch, mumbled an apology, and quickly left. Once the door shut behind them, I burst into laughter. I had spent an extra $20 to have that engraving added, and it was worth every penny. After a moment, I tossed the fake watch out the window and reached into my glove compartment. There, nestled safely, was the real tag heuer. The inscription on the back read, "Forever, Marcia." I hated wearing watches, but maybe I could get used to this one. Just like Sinatra said, I was going to make it all the way. The day I confronted Gerald in his neatly kept bachelor pad, it became clear to me that my wife, Kim, had been living a double life far longer than I had imagined. As I stood in his small but well-organized kitchen, watching him nervously prepare instant coffee, I couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of Kim's presence in his home. It was all too obvious: the dainty picture frames, a few decorative trinkets that had Kim's taste written all over them. Gerald was not only sharing his life with my wife, he had woven her into the fabric of his routine. He handed me the cup of coffee, breaking the silence with, "I do love her, you know." I stared at him for a moment, letting the silence build again before responding. "I wouldn't know. I've never seen you two together, so I'll take your word for it for now." I paused to let that sink in. "She says she loves you, and after watching her these past weeks, I believe she does." He looked relieved, but I wasn't finished. "But you're wrong about one thing," I said. "You weren't as discreet as you thought. She's been racked with guilt for months." I noticed the changes. "You didn't hide it as well as you think." Gerald fidgeted in his seat, his fingers tapping the handle of his coffee cup. "We tried to be careful, but you know how emotions are. They got the better of us." "Yeah," I said dryly. "Emotions." It was fascinating to watch him struggle. I wasn't here for the drama. I was here for the truth. The rest could wait. "Look," Gerald continued, leaning forward as if to make me understand his side. "I know this is messy, but can't we just keep this between us? My job is really important. I can't afford a scandal at work." There it was, the crux of the matter. His career. Not Kim, not the affair, but his reputation. This man wasn't just having an affair, he was trying to climb the corporate ladder, using the emotional safety net of a married woman to cushion his fall. "So, it's your jobs you're worried about?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What about Kim? What about our kids? You think you can just take my wife and none of that matters?" He stammered, clearly flustered by my directness. "I do love her, but I also know she loves you. I was just hoping." "Hoping for what?" I interrupted. "That I wouldn't notice? That I'd be okay with sharing her?" I stood up, the frustration simmering just below the surface. "You think I haven't noticed the late nights, the lies about where she's been? You're wrong, Gerald. I've noticed everything. I've just been giving her the chance to tell me herself." Gerald's face paled as I continued. "You say you're willing to share her, but here's the thing: I'm not. I don't share. So, it's you or me. If she chooses you, she'll never see me again. But if she chooses me, you'll be out of her life for good." He blinked, struggling to process my ultimatum. But you're her husband," he stuttered. "Surely, you haven't noticed any real change in your life because of this. I mean, it's not like I'm taking over or anything." "Oh, I've noticed," I said sharply, enjoying the way he flinched. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Kim has been lying to me about working late shifts when she's been with you. That's time away from our kids, time she owes to our family. And you've been stealing that from me. You think I'll let that slide?" I gave him a minute to let the full weight of my words hit him before continuing. "If she chooses you, Gerald, then you'll be responsible for everything. And I mean everything. My kids will be yours. You'll have to take them to their practices, help with their homework, Be there for every school event. You ready for that? Ready to drive Ben to football and Beth to ballet? Because Kim sure as hell can't drive them. You'll need to step up. And that means getting rid of that flashy sports car outside. You can't fit a family of 4 in that. His face fell as I listed the responsibilities he would have to take on. Clearly, he hadn't considered the reality of taking my place. He wanted Kim, but none of the strings attached. You can have her if she chooses you, I said, standing up. But understand this, you won't just be taking her away from me. You'll be taking on my entire life. And trust me, it's not as easy as you think. He looked at me, wide-eyed and unsure. But what about your house? Couldn't we, have that? I mean, where else would we all live? I let out a dry laugh. You think I'm going to let you live in my house? Not a chance. Besides, it's rented. You'll need to find your own place, and you'd better make sure it has enough room for the kids. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He was beginning to realize the full weight of what he'd gotten himself into. Oh, I added casually, and don't forget to be nice to my parents. My dad's ex-Royal Marine Commando. He's not as strong as he used to be, but he's still got a hell of a grip. When he shakes your hand, smile and take it like a man. And my mom? Well, she's the kind who would either hug you or stab you with a kitchen knife, depending on her mood. You might want to avoid sharp objects around her. Gerald's face was ashen by this point. He had come into this thinking he could get the best of both worlds, Kim and a carefree life. But I was showing him the truth. Being with Kim meant stepping into a full, complex, and often difficult life that he clearly wasn't ready for. Well, I said, finishing the last of my coffee, I've got work to do. You've got some thinking to do. I'll give you an hour to decide whether you're willing to step up or if you're going to bow out and leave her to me. I left his house and drove back to the park where I knew Kim would be waiting. There she was, sitting on the same bench, looking as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. I didn't approach her immediately. Instead, I watched for a while, giving her space to think. After a while, I headed home to take care of a few things. There was a cabinet I'd been working on that needed finishing, and it gave me time to reflect on the events of the morning. At noon, Kim finally came home. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept all night. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she stood there in the doorway as if the weight of her decision was crushing her. Is it him or me? I asked, my voice cold and emotionless. Tears streamed down her face as she answered, I'm so sorry, but it's him. I love you both, but he's younger, fitter, and he's got better prospects. He's going to be running his own store soon. I'm so sorry. I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. I see, I said quietly. I picked up one of the 2 envelopes I had prepared earlier, the one marked with an H, and handed it to her. She opened it, her hands shaking, and saw the divorce papers inside. Without a word, she signed them, not bothering to read a single line. Can we, one last time? She asked, looking at the stairs. I hesitated, but I still loved her, even after everything. Why not? I said, leading her upstairs to our bedroom. It was bittersweet, that final time. No kissing, just the motions of 2 people who had once shared something real, but were now merely going through the motions. When we were done, she got up to clean herself in the bathroom, while I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She called out to me after a while, asking for one last shower together. I looked at my watch. Sorry, no time, I said. You'd better call Gerald and let him know you're coming over. She agreed and went into the kitchen to make the call. When she came back, Her face was pale. "His phone's not working," she said, her voice trembling. "It says service discontinued." I shrugged. "Maybe he's at work," I suggested. She nodded, clearly trying to convince herself that everything was fine. But when she tried calling his work, the response she got made her eyes widen in shock. He resigned," she whispered, staring at her phone. "He left a note saying he had a family emergency in Scotland, but his family's in Devon." I didn't say a word. I just picked up her bags and drove her to Gerald's house. When we pulled up, the sight of the "for rent" sign on the front lawn said everything that needed to be said. She rushed out of the car, fumbling with the keys, and burst through the door. I followed behind, carrying her bags. The place was empty, furniture still there, but no dishes, no kettle, no sign of life. Gerald had vanished, leaving her with nothing. I dropped her bags at the door and walked out without a word. She stood there, stunned and alone, in the empty shell of what she thought would be her new life. "Please," she called after me, her voice breaking. "Can I come back? We can fix this." I turned to her, my face emotionless. "You signed the divorce papers, Kim. It's over. You made your choice, and now you'll have to live with it." I walked away, leaving her standing there, realizing too late that she had lost everything: her lover, her husband, her home, and even her children. In the days that followed, the local paper ran a headline: "Supermarket Scandal. Managers more than just stocking shelves." Gerald's name was all over it, but by then, he was long gone, leaving Kim to deal with the fallout. As for me, I had already moved on. I didn't bother chasing Gerald down. He wasn't worth the effort. And Kim? Well, she still sees the kids sometimes, and every now and then she asks if she can come home. But I always tell her the same thing. The fallback option says no, and with that, my life moved forward, leaving the chaos of her deception behind. If you enjoyed today's story, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.